Do not be fooled by the quiet. In geopolitics, the most dangerous moments are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones that look from the outside like stability, like a pause, like de-escalation, like a system that has found its equilibrium. What is happening in the Middle East right now has that appearance. The headlines have softened, the emergency summits have quieted, the daily crisis coverage has moved on to other theaters, and that softening, that quiet, that apparent return to manageable tension, that is precisely what should be alarming you. Because the historical record of this region, read with analytical honesty, shows that periods of surface calm at structural inflection points are not resolutions, they are setups. And the setup currently underway in the Middle East is, by every serious indicator that trained analysts monitor, one of the most consequential in a generation. So before the next phase arrives, and it will arrive, let us map exactly what is being prepared beneath the surface. If this is the kind of analysis that tells you what the calm is actually concealing, hit like and subscribe right now, because this is exactly what this channel is built to do. In this video, we are going to answer 3 questions with the precision this moment demands. What specifically is the structure beneath the current Middle Eastern calm? And why does it indicate preparation rather than resolution? Who are the actors using this quiet period to reposition, and what do their actual strategic needs, stripped of their public language, tell us about what they are preparing for? And what are the realistic scenarios that emerge from the setup, including the one that the calm was specifically designed to make difficult to anticipate and respond to in time? Let us establish the context, because the framing of the current Middle Eastern calm in mainstream coverage is not simply incomplete, it is structurally misleading in a way that produces exactly the wrong analytical conclusions. The coverage treats the reduction in visible conflict activity as evidence of stabilization. It points to the absence of major escalatory events, to the continuation of diplomatic channels, to the maintenance of existing ceasefire arrangements as indicators that the system is moving toward a lower tension baseline. That framing confuses the absence of visible conflict with the absence of conflict preparation. These are not the same thing. They are, in fact, frequently inversely related. The periods during which the most serious conflict preparation occurs are often the periods of greatest surface calm, because the actors doing the preparing have strong incentives to avoid the kind of visible activity that would alert adversaries, trigger external intervention, and disrupt the preparation window they are exploiting. The historical precedent for this dynamic in this specific region is well documented and deeply instructive. The period immediately preceding the 973 Yom Kippur War was characterized by a surface calm that led Israeli intelligence, among the most capable in the world, to conclude that Arab military action was not imminent, even as Egyptian and Syrian forces were conducting the most sophisticated deception operation in the region's modern military history. The period preceding the 2006 Lebanon War was characterized by a managed, low-visibility tension that concealed Hezbollah's systematic construction of the defensive and offensive infrastructure that made that conflict the most operationally significant non-state military engagement the region had seen. The period preceding the October 7, 2023 attack was characterized by a security assessment that the situation, while tense, was contained and manageable. In each case, the calm was not a resolution, it was a preparation window. The current calm has the specific structural characteristics that distinguish preparation windows from genuine stabilization periods, and mapping those characteristics is the analytical core of this video. Now, the actor breakdown. 4 actors, each using the current quiet period in ways that their public positions systematically obscure, and each whose actual behavior during this calm tells you more about what comes next than anything they are saying. Publicly, begin with Iran. Publicly, Tehran's posture during the current calm is one of measured restraint, the language of diplomatic openness, of conditions for negotiation, of sovereign rights exercised within the framework of international, of norms. That language is designed for the multilateral audience and for the domestic constituencies that need to see their government as something other than a permanent revolutionary vanguard in a state of perpetual confrontation. What Iran is actually doing during this calm period is considerably more operationally significant. The quiet has provided a window for 3 simultaneous activities that the louder periods of the cycle make more difficult to execute without triggering responses that interrupt them. The first is nuclear program consolidation, the advancement of enrichment infrastructure, technical knowledge, and weapons-relevant capability to thresholds that are difficult to reverse, even under significant external pressure. The second is proxy network resupply and reconfiguration, the rebuilding of inventories, the retraining of personnel, and the doctrinal adjustment of affiliated forces whose capabilities were degraded during the more intense conflict periods. The third is diplomatic architecture construction, the building of relationships with actors outside the Western-led framework that provide Iran with alternative economic lifelines and political cover if the next confrontation cycle produces a Western response more severe than previous ones. What Iran actually needs from this calm is time, specifically the time required to advance these three activities to thresholds that change the cost-benefit calculation for any adversary considering military action. In Iran, with a more mature nuclear program, a reconstituted and doctrinally updated proxy network, and a more robust alternative diplomatic architecture, is a harder target and a more costly adversary than the Iran that entered the last confrontation cycle. The calm is being used to close the gap between those two versions of Iran as rapidly as the operational constraints allow. Iran's biggest constraint in this quiet period is the economic pressure that makes the pace of investment in all three activities slower than strategic preference would dictate, and the internal political management of the population whose tolerance for economic sacrifice in service of strategic objectives is not unlimited. Second actor, Israel. Publicly, Israel's posture during the current calm is a combination of vigilance. We remain prepared, our deterrence is intact, our intelligence picture is clear, and diplomatic engagement. We are open to arrangements that serve regional stability and our security interests. Both elements of that public posture are genuine in their own terms, but the operational reality of what Israel is doing during this calm is, like Iran's, considerably more significant than the public language reflects. The Israeli defense establishment is using the quiet period for a systematic reassessment, a comprehensive review of the intelligence failures, operational gaps, and strategic assumptions that the October 7th attack exposed, and that subsequent conflict operations tested against a far more capable and resilient adversary than pre-conflict assessments had modeled. That reassessment is not simply a technical military exercise. It is a strategic recalibration that is producing new operational doctrines, new intelligence architecture priorities, new assessments of which threats require preemptive action rather than reactive deterrence, and new timelines for the decisions, particularly regarding the Iranian nuclear program. The fold that Israeli strategic plan is assessed cannot be indefinitely deferred. What Israel actually needs from this calm is decision clarity on the questions that the intensity of the previous conflict cycle made impossible to resolve with adequate deliberation. Specifically, the nuclear timeline decision and the Northern Front decision, the Iranian nuclear question, whether Israel acts militarily before an Iranian weapons capability matures to a threshold that changes the deterrence calculus permanently, is being evaluated against a compressed timeline whose parameters the calm period is simultaneously clarifying and shortening. The Northern Front questioned the status and future trajectory of the Hezbollah military infrastructure in Lebanon is being assessed against a post-conflict picture that is more favorable to Israeli action than the pre-October 7 picture was. Given the degradation of Hezbollah's senior leadership and operational capacity, Israel's biggest constraint is the same constraint it has navigated throughout its strategic history: the management of American red lines, alliance requirements, and domestic political pressures that simultaneously shape the timing and the form of its strategic decisions without fully controlling them. Third actor, Saudi Arabia, whose behavior during the current calm is the most strategically complex and the most consequential for the regional order's future architecture. Publicly, Riyadh's posture is one of careful diplomatic engagement, pursuing the normalization framework with Israel that was interrupted by October 7th, managing the relationship with Iran following the Chinese brokered normalization agreement, and maintaining the American security relationship while deepening the strategic autonomy that Vision 2030's economic transformation is designed to underpin. Each of those public positions reflects a genuine element of Saudi strategy. Together, they conceal a more fundamental strategic calculation that the current calm is enabling Saudi leadership to pursue with unusual deliberateness. That calculation is about the architecture of the post-transition regional order. Specifically, what kind of Saudi Arabia, with what kind of relationships and what kind of internal economic and social structure, is best positioned to exercise genuine regional leadership in a multipolar Middle East that no longer has a single dominant external patron setting the rules. What Saudi Arabia actually needs from this calm is the space to make several large, partially irreversible strategic investments in its domestic transformation agenda, in its alternative partnership architecture, and in its regional diplomatic positioning, whose returns are long-term and whose risks are manageable only in a period of reduced immediate conflict pressure. The calm is providing that space, and Riyadh is using it with a strategic seriousness and a planning horizon that the transactional framing of most Western coverage of Saudi policy consistently underestimates. Saudi Arabia's biggest constraint is the internal tension between the pace of social and economic transformation that Vision 2030 requires and the conservative institutional constituencies whose cooperation that transformation depends on. Attention. That external security pressure exacerbates and that the current calm, whatever its origins, is allowing the leadership to manage with more finesse than the confrontation periods allowed. Fourth factor, the United States, whose management of the current Middle Eastern calm reflects the same structural constraints we have mapped across previous analyses, the bandwidth limitation of simultaneous theater management, the domestic political fracture that complicates sustained strategic engagement, and the gap between the commitments inherited from the consolidation phase and the capacity to honor them at the level of credibility that deterrence requires. Publicly, the American position on the current calm is relief. Dressed in the language of diplomatic accomplishment, the reduction in conflict intensity is presented as evidence that American engagement is working, that the crisis management architecture is functioning, and that the path toward regional stability, however difficult, remains navigable. That framing serves real domestic political purposes. It is analytically inadequate as a description of what the calm actually represents. What the United States actually needs from this calm period is what it has needed at every comparable juncture in the recent history of its Middle Eastern engagement: a coherent, strategic framework that distinguishes between the commitments that are genuinely essential to American interests and those that are historical inheritances whose maintenance costs now exceed their strategic value. The absence of that framework, the continued attempt to maintain the full architecture of commitments from the consolidation phase with the diminished bandwidth of the fracture and competitive challenge stages, is what produces the gap between American declaratory policy and American operational capacity that every regional actor is currently factoring into its strategic calculations. America's biggest constraint in this calm period is that the domestic political conditions required to execute the strategic rationalization its actual position demands are even less available during the quiet periods than during the crisis periods, when the urgency of events can temporarily override the polarization that makes sustained strategic deliberation impossible. Now, the structural facts, the hard realities beneath the Middle Eastern calm that define what it is actually setting up. Structural fact number one. The military balance across the region's primary confrontation axes has shifted more significantly during the preceding conflict period than any of the parties' public assessments acknowledge. And those shifts are not uniformly disadvantageous to the parties that initiated the conflicts. The degradation of Hezbollah's senior leadership and certain operational capabilities is real and operationally significant. The demonstration of Iranian ballistic and drone capability, its reach, its volume, its ability to saturate certain defensive architectures is equally real and has been absorbed into the planning. Assumptions of every military establishment in the region, the performance of certain precision systems, and the identified gaps in certain defensive architectures have been analyzed with care by every actor with the intelligence capacity to do so. The current calm is partly a consequence of those assessments, a period during which all parties are recalibrating their operational planning against an updated picture of the military balance. That recalibration is not a path to stability. It is a preparation for the next confrontation cycle, conducted with a more accurate understanding of the balance than the previous cycle provided. Structural fact number two. The economic architecture of the region is under a structural stress that the surface calm does not alleviate, and that the next confrontation cycle will significantly exacerbate. The Gulf states' economic transformation agendas, Saudi Vision 2030, UAE diversification, Qatari economic development, are all predicated on a baseline of regional stability that sustained conflict directly undermines, not only through physical disruption, but through the foreign investment confidence that these programs require and that conflict environments destroy. This economic dependency on stability creates a specific incentive structure in which the Gulf states have strong motivation to use the calm period to advance their transformation agendas as rapidly as possible, because they understand that the calm is finite and that the next confrontation cycle will impose costs on those agendas that will need to be rebuilt in the subsequent quiet period. The cycle of conflict and calm is therefore being internalized into the economic planning of regional states, in a way that accelerates both the economic transformation during calm periods and the hedging behavior that reduces dependency on the security architecture during conflict periods. Structural fact number 3. The information environment of the current calm has been actively shaped by multiple regional actors to serve their preparation objectives in ways that Western analytical frameworks are structurally slower to identify than operationally focused intelligence services. The deliberate projection of de-escalatory signals, diplomatic openings, restrained rhetoric, back-channel engagement is serving preparation objectives in at least 2 simultaneous ways. It is reducing the pressure for external intervention that would disrupt preparation activities, and it is managing the perceptions of domestic populations, whose tolerance for continued sacrifice and confrontation requires periodic signals that the leadership is pursuing alternatives to perpetual conflict, even when the operational planning is moving in a different direction. This information management is not unique to any single actor in the current calm. It is a consistent feature of how regional actors have navigated the conflict and calm cycle for decades. What makes the current instance analytically significant is the sophistication and coordination with which multiple actors are simultaneously projecting de-escalatory signals while conducting the preparation activities that the signals are designed to obscure. Structural fact number 4. The external powers most consequentially involved in the regional architecture, the United States, China, Russia, and to a lesser extent Turkey, are each using the current Middle Eastern calm to advance their own regional positioning in ways that are individually rational and collectively destabilizing. The United States is using the quiet to attempt a diplomatic architecture to the normalization framework, the regional security dialogue that its bandwidth constraints prevent it from investing in adequately during crisis periods. China is using the quiet to deepen the institutional and economic relationships whose architecture we mapped in previous analyses, advancing the infrastructure of alternative regional alignment with the patience that calm periods allow. Russia, managing its own severe resource constraints from the Ukrainian theater, is using the quiet to maintain its Syrian and broader regional footholds with minimal investment, while the primary attention of its adversaries is elsewhere. Turkey is using the quiet to advance its regional economic and diplomatic positioning, building the infrastructure of the swing state role it is pursuing. The combination of these simultaneous but uncoordinated external positioning activities is advancing the regional fragmentation that makes the next confrontation cycle more complex and more difficult to manage than any of the individual actors' preferences would produce if they were operating in isolation. Now the scenarios, 3 paths from the current setup, differentiated by the trigger, the timing, and the degree to which the preparation activities underway during the calm have reached their intended thresholds before the next confrontation cycle begins. Scenario A is a managed return to the confrontation cycle, the outcome that the preparation activities underway on all sides are oriented toward, in the sense that each actor is attempting to ensure that when the next conflict period arrives, it arrives at a moment of their choosing and from a position of maximum relative advantage. In this path, the calm holds long enough for the most critical preparation activities to reach their intended thresholds. Iranian nuclear and proxy consolidation, Israeli strategic recalibration, Saudi economic transformation advancement, American diplomatic architecture construction, and the transition to the next confrontation cycle is triggered by a development that one of the key actors has prepared for and, in some sense, initiated. This is not a good outcome in the sense of being conflict-free. It is the best available outcome in the sense that it is the one in which all parties have had the preparation time their planning requires, and in which the escalation dynamics are most susceptible to management by the actors involved because they have been at least partially anticipated. Watch for any of the key actors making a significant, visible strategic move, a military action, a diplomatic announcement, and a capability demonstration that is clearly the product of deliberate preparation rather than reactive crisis management. That move will signal that at least one actor has concluded its preparation is sufficiently advanced to initiate the transition from calm to confrontation on its own timeline. Scenario B is premature trigger, the scenario that the structural conditions of the current calm make significantly more probable than any of the actors' strategic preferences would produce deliberately. In this path, the calm is interrupted before the preparation activities of the key actors have reached their intended thresholds by a development that none of them fully controls, a sub-state actor action that crosses a threshold requiring response, an intelligence operation that goes wrong and cannot be managed below the public visibility threshold, an economic or energy market disruption that forces a political response that activates military contingencies. or a miscommunication in one of the degraded back-channel communication architectures that produces a responsive action based on a fundamental misread of intent. So the premature trigger scenario is the most dangerous because it produces confrontation at a moment when the actors involved have prepared partially, but not completely, when the operational planning is not fully validated, and when the escalation management frameworks have not been updated to reflect the current military balance. Historical analogies suggest that partially prepared confrontations carry higher escalation risks than either fully prepared or clearly deterred ones, precisely because the uncertainty about relative capability and the incompleteness of escalation management planning produces more aggressive hedging behavior from all parties simultaneously. Scenario C is the extended calm that enables threshold crossing, the scenario that Iran's preparation strategy is specifically oriented toward, and that American and Israeli strategic planners assess as the most severe long-term risk. In this path, the calm holds longer than any of the actors currently anticipate, providing Iran with the preparation window required to advance its nuclear program to a threshold that fundamentally changes. The regional deterrence architecture, not necessarily a tested weapon, but a matured capability whose reversal through military action becomes either impossible or prohibitively costly if this threshold is crossed during the calm period. The strategic landscape that the subsequent confrontation cycle occurs within is categorically different from the one that all current planning assumes. Every escalation calculation, every deterrence assessment, every alliance commitment is recalibrated against a new baseline in which the existential risk dimension of regional conflict has been fundamentally altered. This is the scenario that the silence of the current calm most specifically enables, and the reason it generates the most alarm among the analysts who track the nuclear timeline indicators most closely. Now, the personal and practical dimension, because the setup beneath the Middle Eastern calm translates into specific near-term impacts on the lives of people far from the region's geography. The energy impact is the most immediate and the most direct. The Middle East remains the marginal supplier for global energy markets, the producer whose output decisions and whose infrastructure security determine the price at which the global market clears. A confrontation cycle of comparable or greater intensity than the previous one, triggered at a moment when the preparation activities underway have advanced the capabilities and the operational ambitions of the key parties, produces an energy market disruption whose severity is a function of its geographic scope and duration. The Strait of Hormuz scenario remains the most severe single-point disruption risk, a scenario whose probability the current preparation activities are meaningfully advancing, and its activation produces oil price movements that translate into consumer energy costs within days and into broader inflation dynamics within weeks. The households whose budgets are already managing the residual price level of previous energy shocks. The next disruption cycle arrives with less financial buffer than any of the previous ones in the post-pandemic period. The financial market dimension carries a specific risk that the current calm is actively obscuring. Market pricing of Middle Eastern geopolitical risk has relaxed during the calm period in ways that reflect the surface appearance of stabilization rather than the structural preparation underway beneath it. The gap between current risk pricing and the risk implied by the preparation indicators represents a mispricing whose correction will be sudden, significant, and indiscriminate across asset classes when a threshold crossing event forces the repricing for investors managing long-term portfolios, including the retirement savings of ordinary households. The period of calm-induced risk mispricing is the window during which portfolio positioning adjustments carry the most favorable cost-benefit ratio, because adjustments made before the repricing capture the option value of preparation rather than the cost of reaction. The humanitarian and political dimension extends beyond the immediate parties in ways that Western publics are inadequately prepared for. A confrontation cycle, the scale that the current preparation activities are oriented toward, produces refugee flows, economic disruptions, and political pressures on European and other Western governments, whose domestic political management is already strained by previous migration and economic challenges. The domestic political consequences of a major Middle Eastern confrontation cycle are not contained to the region. They propagate to energy markets, through migration pressure, through security demands, and through the alliance management requirements that every significant escalation in this region imposes on the Western security architecture. Here's my final assessment, delivered with the analytical honesty that the current setup demands. The calm in the Middle East is real in its surface manifestations and misleading in its structural implications. The preparation activities underway beneath it across all the key actors In the specific domains that determine the character and intensity of the next confrontation cycle are at a stage of advancement that makes the calm's continuation finite and its end consequential. The specific prediction I will make is this: within 6 to 18 months, at least one of the preparation thresholds we have mapped will produce a visible, attributable development that transitions the region from the current setup phase to the next confrontation cycle. The triggering development may be the Iranian nuclear program reaching a threshold that forces the Israeli decision. It may be a proxy network action that crosses a response threshold before its sponsors intended. It may be a diplomatic collapse, the normalization framework's final failure that removes the last institutional incentive for restraint among the key actors. What it will not be is a surprise to anyone who has read the structure beneath the calm, rather than accepting the calm surface appearance at face value. The preparation is underway. The thresholds are advancing. The window during which the trajectory of the setup can be influenced through effective deterrence, through genuine diplomatic architecture, through the kind of structural engagement that addresses the drivers of the preparation rather than its surface manifestations, is not unlimited. It is the length of the calm itself, and the calm, by every serious indicator that trained analysts are monitoring, is not in its early stages. Do not follow the headline, follow the structure beneath it. The calm is a story only if you mistake the absence of visible conflict for the absence of conflict preparation. The real story is what the calm is enabling, what the preparation is advancing, and what the next confrontation cycle will look like when the thresholds being built toward right now have been reached. That is the story this channel exists to tell. Before the headlines arrive, with the precision the structural situation demands, and with the honesty about uncertainty that serious analysis requires. No panic, no noise, just the structure, the setup, and the honest assessment of what the quiet is actually concealing. If this analysis belongs in your feed, subscribe now. Share this with someone who needs the full picture before the next cycle begins, and turn on notifications, because the follow-up to this video maps the 3 specific threshold indicators. That will tell you in real time whether the calm is about to end and which scenario is activating when it does.